Has begun 2018 by targeting two countries he says are misusing American funds, Iran and Pakistan. The U.S. president's first tweet of the year accused Pakistan of lies and deceit. Now the country's foreign minister is hitting back, saying President Trump quoted a figure of $33 billion given to Pakistan over the last 15 years. He can hire a U.S.-based audit firm on our expense to verify this figure and let the world know who is lying and deceiving. Earlier, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations warned aid to Pakistan could be stopped entirely.
Pakistan has played a double game for years. They work with us at times, and they also harbor the terrorists that attack our troops in Afghanistan. That game is not acceptable to this administration. We expect far more cooperation from Pakistan in the fight against terrorism. The President is willing to go to great lengths to stop all funding from Pakistan as they continue to harbor and support terrorism.
So Sarah Murray is at the White House. Sarah, Happy New Year to you. A lot of people scratching their heads, not at the overall issue, because most would say that Pakistan hasn't been a forthright partner in fighting terrorism. But I think a lot of people are wondering why now? Why the President issued this tweet yesterday or today, whenever that was, today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we didn't really get a straight answer from the White House on this issue. There doesn't seem to be any new development, at least any new development they're willing to make public about what inspired the president to fire off this warning. And remember, it wasn't too long ago, just a few months ago, that the president said he believed that Pakistan was actually beginning to respect the United States. We've now seen a sharp change in that tone of rhetoric. And as you pointed out, this is not a new issue with Pakistan, the notion that they are not a worthwhile partner, or at least a fully honest partner in the fight against terrorism. And I think time and time again, the U.S. has looked at the amount of aid they give to Pakistan and whether essentially we're getting what we're paying for in that sense. But why it's suddenly come up again now, that's still a little bit of a mystery.
The president also issuing tweets about Iran and the protests there, throwing his support behind the protesters. The Iranian president responding, though, people that you called terrorists in the past can't be people you support now. Is it helpful at all that the president is issuing these tweets as this unrest is taking place in Iran?
Well, I think that's a debate that's happening right here in the United States. You know, there was criticism of the Obama administration for not taking a firmer line in support of protesters in the past in Iran. I think the Trump administration feels like they certainly don't want to be likened to the Obama administration, and in their view, they don't want to repeat the same mistakes of the past. But it's worth noting how ambiguous they are still being on this issue, even in spite of the president's tweets. Today, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders came out. She fielded questions from reporters, but she stopped short of calling for a regime change in Iran. So it's not clear exactly what outcome this White House wants, what they're hoping to see change in Iran, or how they are hoping to affect that change, if at all, or if this was just the president seeing these images on television, for instance, and deciding to fire off that tweet. We haven't really seen a coherent strategy from the White House.
So the protests in Iran taking many by surprise. You could also argue that the message sent from Kim Jong-un on New Year's Day to South Korean leader, it was also a surprise, perhaps overture to thaw at least some of the tensions between the two countries. Is this in any way circumventing the U.S. role in the region, and is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, that's a great question. I think we don't really know yet how this is going to play out. We know that South Korea has been pressing the U.S. over and over again to try to get the U.S. to the table, involved in talks with North Korea. We've seen the Secretary of State indicate maybe that would be possible at some point. So far, the White House, though, hasn't indicated they're willing to go to the table, and maybe this does sideline the U.S.'s role. We really haven't seen President Trump weigh in on this. He was asked about it on New Year's Eve. He essentially said, "We'll see," when he was talking about North Korea's nuclear capability. He's taken a very tough line publicly, but that's essentially been all it is. He's exchanged insults with Kim Jong-un. Then the two of them have certainly exchanged threats. But again, so far, we haven't seen from the administration how they're hoping to resolve this issue with North Korea, despite all of the criticism President Trump has levied against previous administrations for doing too little.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un also reminding everyone around the world that he has a nuclear button that he's prepared to use on his desk as well. Sarah, great to see you. Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Well, for more on President Trump's Twitter attacks on Pakistan and Iran, I'm joined by Nicholas Burns. He's a former U.S. Undersecretary of State and was the lead U.S. negotiator on Iran's nuclear program. Nick, great to have you on. Let's start with Iran, given your role in that negotiation. Many in the Iranian regime were surprised by the uprising that we've seen over the past few days. Were you surprised?
I think everyone was surprised because it doesn't appear to be coming from the natural reform movement that's based in Tehran. It comes from the working class. It comes from people who are affected by corruption, the lack of jobs, the reported up to 40% unemployment, the real unemployment rate in Iran, and the fact that the nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration did not end up leading to a great deal of investment in Iran. There are still U.S. sanctions on Iran for ballistic missiles, for instance. And so I think all of that amounts to a movement that is hard to judge. We've now had statements today from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards that they're just about to put down this rebellion. We'll see if that happens in the next day or two. That would be a consequential development. But I think this is, you're seeing a powerful wave of protests throughout the country in Iran. It has to be taken seriously.
And it conjures up images of the 2009 protests that we saw there following an election results. What are the similarities and differences that you're currently observing from what we see now?
I think that the great difference is that in 2009, it was really young people, reformists, taking to the streets in Tehran against a government that had stolen an election back in June 2009 from the people of Iran. This is, as I said, it appears to be a series of protests really disconnected from each other in various cities in Iran, among the Azeri and Kurdish as well as Persian populations of Iran, pretty much people who are not part of the Tehran reform movement. And you're also seeing, I think, a more muted response in Tehran because some of those reformers have supported the current Prime Minister Rouhani, and his government. So I think there are substantial differences between the two, between 2009 and this year's demonstrations.
And the president didn't waste a day to bash the Iran deal, which he's called one of the worst deals in U.S. history. He said today on Twitter, all of the money that President Obama so foolishly gave them went into terrorism and into their pockets. Does he have a point in the sense that the citizens of Iran, or at least the ones that we're seeing out on the streets right now, are not seeing the net effect of what was promised them?
I don't think that's the point that President Trump was trying to make. I disagree very much with President Trump with his bashing of the Iran nuclear deal. I was the Iran negotiator in the George W. Bush administration, but I supported President Obama's Iran nuclear deal of 2015. It makes sense. It's for the United States. It's in the interest of Trump to continue to criticize it, I think, is unwarranted. I do think President Trump has been right to speak out in defense of the protesters. Any American president should do that. I would hope that the European leaders would speak out much more strongly than they have in support of people's right to express themselves in an authoritarian country like Iran. I do think that the problem and the challenge for President Trump is he doesn't want to inject himself into the middle of this debate, because if he does that, then he gives the Iranian regime an excuse to point to the United States as somehow supporting or fueling these protests.
And let me ask you quickly your reaction to another hot spot, the other part of the world, and that's between North and South Korea. What was your take on the surprise overture from the North Korean and the reciprocated response from the South Korean president, obviously in anticipation of the Winter Olympics there?
Well, two contrasting thoughts. First, I think it's an attempt by Kim Jong-un of North Korea to separate the South Korean government of President Moon with the United States. He didn't make an overture to the United States. He made it to South Korea. But I do think it's good for the two sides to talk. It's good if they meet in Panmunjom. We need to take down the temperature level here. And I think diplomacy is the way forward, not war in the early months of 2018. It wouldn't make sense for the United States, in my judgment, to launch a preventive attack against North Korea without having had negotiations with the North Koreans first. So if this is the precursor to that, if Kim Jong-un is hinting that he's willing to talk with China and the United States, South Korea and Japan, that, in my view, is a necessary step.
Perhaps turning down the temperature just a bit as we start off 2018. Nick Burns, always great to have you on. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's corporate tax cut is proving pretty expensive, at least for now. It's costing some companies big money, and they say it's still a good thing. We'll tell you why coming up.